Congratulations, Guardian, you either traversed the corridors of time, or you were a big brain and simply waited for everyone else to get it done so you could go pick up the quest for Bastion from Saint 14. And upon its completion, of course, you received the brand new exotic kinetic fusion rifle. What's going on, Guardians? My name is the Black Link, and in this video we are going to be reviewing that fusion rifle. There's been a lot of talk about it. A lot of people, I think, like it, a lot of people don't like it, but in this video we're going to be giving you my opinion of the gun and some caveats that you may or may not have known about it. It's actually pretty significantly powerful in PvP and even has some decent utility in PvE. But you got it done, and you've got a really interesting brand new weapon to deal with. Bastion itself is a super interesting fusion rifle. Comes with the ability Saint's Fist, charged to fire 3 spreads of kinetic slugs, and those 3 spreads are pretty noticeable in the way this gun works. So rather than shooting energy bolts like normal fusion rifles, Bastion fires 3 separate bolts on a target, or multiple targets if you aim it at different enemies. But it's actually way more than what you might be thinking. So while it fires 3 separate charges, each of those charges fires about 7 different bolts for a total of 21 bolts every time you fire this gun. And despite the fact that you're taking basically 3 shots every time you fire, it only costs you 1 round. So that's really kind of interesting. For basically every pull of the trigger, every 1 round you spend, you're firing off 21 bolts at enemies. And that's a little nutty. Comparatively speaking, most other fusion rifles shoot 7 bolts per shot. So with 1 pull of the trigger, 1 round expended, you are firing off 3 times as many bolts as other fusion rifles do. Yeah, it's a little crazy. And of course, because it's a kinetic fusion rifle, it's actually naturally dealing about 10% more damage than a normal fusion rifle would in PvE. Needless to say, there's definitely some quirky benefits to this gun. The 7 bolts that are fired per burst on this gun come out in almost a perfectly hexagonal shape, and because of the way the shots are staggered, it makes it rather easy to spread those shots along multiple targets. The damage on this thing also isn't bad at all, though it's kind of hard to compare to other fusion rifles because of that natural 10% bonus damage it's getting in PvE for being a kinetic weapon. And honestly, this gun performs so differently to other fusions, there's really no point in comparing it to something like, say, the Loaded Question or the Erentil. And in actuality, it performs more like a shotgun that you can carry in PvE. Stat-wise, the Bastion has a range stat of 33, a stability stat of 52, 34 for the handling, 32 for the reload, 65 for the aim assist, which you really notice especially in PvP, and finally a recoil direction stat of 75. Meaning the gun shoots fairly vertically, although you'll notice kind of a left or rightward push sometimes when you're firing this thing. Really, it's nothing that you can't handle. Anyways, moving back to the perks, it also comes with hammer forged rifling, which gives the gun increased range, something that it very much does need. We'll talk about that a little bit in the PvP section. Liquid coils, which slows down the weapon's charge time, but increases its overall impact, making it hit a bit harder. Next up, we've got this weapon's special trait, Breakthrough. A portion of this weapon's damage bypasses elemental shields. So of course, kinetic weapons deal significantly less damage against elemental shields in PvE. This doesn't really affect PvP too much. But with the Bastion here, basically what I've been able to see is that about half of the bolts that you fire with Bastion at shielded enemies will see a significant reduction in that overall damage reduction versus shielded enemies. Basically, versus the lowest amount of damage a kinetic weapon can do to a shield versus like the damage of half the bolts you do. With Bastion, you're seeing about an 85% increase in damage versus shielded enemies there. Now, the final caveat to this, and what really makes Breakthrough an interesting trait here, is the fact that damage that you're firing, about half of the bolts you're firing, are ignoring the shields entirely and directly affecting enemy health. Yeah, that's what this thing is doing. Basically, half of the shots that you're firing here are acting like the enemy has no shield. So those shots are going right through the enemy's shield and lowering the enemy's direct health. That's super unique. And it's actually something you'll really come to appreciate in specific activities, specifically stuff like Nightfalls and Nightmare Hunts with match game on. That's where you really notice this ability. Being able to take down enemy health without destroying their shield at all has definitely got a place in the game, but it's really not something you're going to notice too much in normal content. I noticed a lot of people were talking about this gun and how muted it feels in PvE, and certainly it's not the most powerful weapon you'll ever have in PvE. There are much better exotic options, but this thing has serious utility in some of those in-game modes. When match game is on, or whenever you're facing an enemy with really hard to break shields, it's nice to be able to bypass some of that and just start chipping away at their health like you can with Bastion. It's actually really interesting because the way this gun splits out its damage on shielded enemies, you're actually still dealing maximum damage with this weapon. Even versus a shielded foe, your damage is just going to be split between the damage being done to the shield and then the damage being done to the enemy's health. I'll give you an example here. So over here in the Tribute Hall, of course, we've got a shielded Minotaur. Unshielded, Bastion does about 1,342 or 1,343 points of damage per bolt on each shot. But once an enemy is shielded, you see that damage is cut between the two different numbers, either 872 or 873, and the number 470. Add those together and what do you get? 1,342 or 1,343. Meaning, even against a shielded enemy, Bastion is technically still dealing maximum damage. That damage is just being split between damage happening against the enemy's shield and damage directly hitting the enemy's health, regardless of the state of the shield. I don't know about you guys, but that has utility in PvE. And while of course it's always going to be more beneficial for you to swap to an energy weapon, especially a matching energy weapon to that shield, and pop it really quickly, this has got a lot of utility in in-game activities. For some of those red bars and match game nightfalls, or like I said before, nightmare hunts, you're going to be able to erase them pretty quickly with Bastion. So while the gun's not the best in PvE, it's certainly not awful, and it deals a decent amount of damage overall. Although it is worth noting that this doesn't work against barrier champions, which is a little bit of a head scratcher, but hey, I guess they gotta keep their mods relevant for something. But ultimately, you're still going to want to whip out an energy weapon, especially a matching energy weapon, in order to take down those shields. It's just going to be more beneficial than sticking with Bastion overall, although it's still a lot of damage in PvE. Finally, Bastion comes with a composite stock for slightly increased stability and slightly increased handling speed. Alright, now that that has all been said, let's talk about the performance of this weapon, because it's certainly something interesting. I'm having a lot of fun with this thing in PvP right now. It's a really weird but really powerful gun. At optimal range, which is about maybe the 12 to 13 meter range, this gun deals about 30 damage per bolt. Meaning, if you land like all 21 shots, you're dealing like way over 600 points of damage, more than enough to take out any combination of Guardians in the game, including Guardians in their super. The amount of damage this thing puts out in PvP is radical, and performance-wise, it feels a lot like the Lord of Wolves, I would say, is the best direct comparison, especially if you're on controller. This gun feels really good and really easy to use on controller. The gun definitely does kick a bit when you fire. When you hold and fire with this thing, there's kind of a bit of a delay between shots, and during that delay, the gun feels like it kind of kicks to the left a little bit. It's got a recoil direction of 75, but I found it's really not that hard to keep this gun on target. In between like your first and second shot, if you kind of go to realign yourself, you can actually push out the lethality range of this thing by a little bit. I was getting some one-shot kills at like up to 20 meters. It was a little nutty. So you can definitely push that optimal range out just a bit, because the damage per shot, like I said, optimally it's about 30 damage per bolt, but this thing fires so many bolts that it's really forgiving at range if you can keep yourself on target. Like I said, it kicks a bit to the left, sometimes to the right. But if you can keep your target centered, if you can keep this bad boy from bucking too hard, it takes this weapon from a close to mid-range weapon to a far end of mid-range weapon without too much difficulty. But don't expect to challenge other long-range fusions like Aaron Till and Merciless and stuff like that. This is definitely not a long-range weapon. You need to basically learn to choose your encounters. Play it like a fusion rifle, pre-charge. Make people come to you, catch them in long corridors so they can't jump up or to the left or to the right, and you will be able to dominate this thing, but you have to know when to disengage. If somebody's a little too far off, don't sit there and keep trying to shoot at them so that you can get one or two bolts off. This gun kicks a little bit too much for that, and it is not a long-range weapon. You want to keep this thing squarely within mid-range, where it is absolutely dominant. Just keep it in mid-range where its stickiness will help you stay on target, and you will love this thing. It's a lot of fun. Not to mention the charge time is relatively fast for a fusion rifle, and with how easily this thing kills, it's just a really powerful option out there right now. Plus, it's a lot of fun to play with. But alright Guardians, that is how you can get your hands on the exotic kinetic fusion rifle Bastion. And those are my thoughts. That's my review of the exotic weapon as well. I hope you all are having fun with this gun. If you didn't go through the corridors, you should be getting access to that basically right now as this video is out. I hope you enjoy it. Be sure to leave me your thoughts on this weapon down in the comment section below. That's going to be it for this one, Guardians. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed, feel free to drop a like, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest stuff we're putting out. But I'm out for now. As always, I am the Black Link. You Guardians, stay frosty. I'll see you out there in the Crucible.